Hello, I'm John David Ebert, and this is a promo video to discuss my new book, which is called Apocalypse Now, Scene by Scene. It's a short book. It's about 150 pages, so it's not long, but it does break the film down scene by scene, and I prefer the film's longer version, Apocalypse Now Redux, that was released in the year 2001. I think there's a lot more material there that is useful for the semiotics of the film. And basically the film has a kind of, it retrieves a kind of loose epic oral tribal structure anyway, which is very loose, such as the oral tribal bards who used to sing the Odyssey and the Iliad. We know that they could move elements around, they could add material to those epics. We think, for example, as Carolyn Alexander has remarked in her book about the war about Achilles, that Achilles himself was a later add-in into the epic of the Iliad, that he was not originally present. After all, he's absent for almost the entire epic and only puts in a few brief appearances. And he's also the youngest member of all of the members of the expedition. So there's something suspiciously additional about him. But Coppola is basically retrieving this epic, or what the great media studies theoretician Walter Ong called the oral residue, of the epic mentality, where you have a gigantic sort of rambling narrative structure to which you can either add or delete scenes at will, such as Hamlet. Shakespeare's Hamlet now is another excellent example of this, where entire sequences can be removed from Hamlet or added to it without any detriment whatsoever to the literary quality of the work, because there again, Shakespeare was just coming out of part of the Renaissance, that was just coming out of the medieval period, where there was still a heavy oral residue. Learning still had a kind of very strong oral emphasis tied to it at that time. And I think Coppola with Apocalypse Now retrieves that, and with the Redux, I think all the scenes that he adds in are very good ones. So what I've done is basically with this book is to sort of invent a new literary genre. That is to say, I've sort of hybridized the novelization, which recounts events in a straightforward manner, with the sort of DVD commentary that then adds in a commentary, although my commentary is not about technical specifics, but about philosophical specifics. I look at the film through the lens of theory. I bring in Cornelius Castoriadis and Gadamer and Lacan and Derrida and all of those guys. And basically I read the film as a kind of attempt to unplug Willard from the name of the father, what Lacan calls the paternal order of the big other, in which the individual has to accede to castration by giving up desire for the mother, and then one becomes, one is able then to signify and is not psychotic, and one functions normally in society. But for Lacan, see, that's a castration. And so I framed the film in a way that shows Willard slowly, gradually unplugging from the paternal order of the military. He simply opens up with him functioning as an extension of the military, as an organ, as an assassin. He's a hollow man. He doesn't have his own free will, his own life at the beginning. That's part of what's destroyed him at the opening of the film, I think. And as the narrative progresses and he gets to the Kurtz compound, eventually Kurtz teaches him about how to commit an act from out of what Schelling called the abyss of freedom within. So that the act is purely a conscious, deliberate choice. The act of killing Kurtz, not as a military assassin, merely an extension of the name of the father. There's a new alliance that's formed, and I think the French plantation sequence is very effective here in being put back into the film, so that we've got this idea of an alliance with the mother. Now, Deleuze, in his book on masochism, wrote this brilliant treatise on masochism, in which he argued essentially that sadism and masochism are normally grouped together as sadomasochism, but really that's wrong, because sadism is an entirely different structure that's dominated by the father. In Sard's works, it's always the father doing cruel things to the daughter, or the tortures that are going on are always sort of under the paternal authority. Whereas masochism, the model here being, of course, from Leopold von Sacher-Masoch's book, Venus and Furs, is based on a contract that the masochist makes with the mother, he makes a contract to ally himself with the mother in order to expel the father from the symbolic order. And Lacan's entire worldview is about constructing a symbolic order which defeats and ruptures the imaginary axis, the order where the ego, which is a fiction of the subject essentially, but it can get clouded and confused by false identifications with phantasms in specular images. The film begins with the shattering, Willard shattering the specular image of himself as an assassin. He rejects that image and he's ready to have a new construction come about in alliance with the mother to expel the paternal authority that he's been operating under the whole time. So it is it's a Lacanian reading that draws an X over Lacan and defeats and deconstructs his L schema. So that's sort of my reading of Apocalypse Now in favor of a more Jungian order wherein I think for Lacan, the primary order is the symbolic axis, and the symbolic order that Zizek likes to jump up and down about in every book of his that you read is really an order in which linguistic signifiers defeat images, myths, dreams. The whole Jungian universe is essentially anathematized by Lacan, and the symbolic order is something that is constructed over that. So that's sort of my theoretical reading of the book. And I've also divided the sort of book into two halves, the way Coppola initially wanted to present the film in two halves, to stop at the sampan sequence and have an old-fashioned lobby intermission in which the audience would then come back in and watch the second half of the film. So I've divided the book into two halves, in which the first half has to do with going into the war, and in which the second half is called The Journey to the World Below, because everything that happens after the sampan massacre, especially the whole sequence with the Dolong Bridge, is a classical retrieval of a journey to the underworld, a Jungian nequia, the journey that all the great epics, Odysseus journeys to the underworld in the Odyssey, all the great epics have the hero journeying to the underworld and communicating with the dead. And I think what we get in the second half of Apocalypse Now Redux is a gradual journey to the world below, and a sort of devolution of consciousness back to its primordial ancestral roots and the discovery of the animal within. All of this undoes the Lacanian paternal order that is ruptured and disintegrates and is pulled apart as the narrative advances, and Willard moves toward his great final act of a free will act in the killing of Kurtz, which is something that is motivated out of his own choice, not something that he's doing for the military, because Kurtz has essentially put him through an initiatory ordeal which has unplugged him from the paternal order, and so that he can act on his own. And he emerges from the end of the film no longer as a hollow man, but as a three-dimensional individual with a free will, capable of free acts, acting from out of Schelling's abyss of freedom from within him. So that's the book. I hope you'll order it and enjoy it, and let me know what you think.